Hey Titanfall Legends, I'm your host Jax, and to those who don't know me because I've been so inactive recently, I am the creator of the channel, and I'm back here today because Jared and I recorded our first podcast last night for Titanfall Legends. I hosted it, Jared was the guest. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to see this continue, leave some feedback below. I really want to see what you have to think as a Titanfall Legend. If you want this continued, and that's kind of the general consensus, it definitely will be. I'll bring on more guests, Jared will join me from time to time. And I'll make this a weekly thing that we do every weekend that you can either watch live and participate or just watch on YouTube when you get the chance. Also, keep in mind this was a test run. There wasn't too much planning put into this, so future episodes will have a bit better production quality. So without further ado, here's the podcast. Jared's going to be on in a second, but first, I just want to give you a brief intro of what this podcast is. So, months back, Jared and I had an idea to do a podcast weekly based on what was going on in Titanfall 2. So the whole idea of it would be to give a good update for the week for people who don't play the game but still want to keep up to date, or people who play the game and want to know what's going on. We'd want to talk about real topics that actually matter to the game, not fluff. And at the same time, I wanted it to be community based, not where just Jared and I are talking or other hosts are talking, but where the viewers can actually contribute to it. So this is kind of a test run. If this goes well, if at the end of this episode it gets a good response, we will turn this into a series, and we're actually going to make it very community-based. So unlike most podcasts you've probably seen, I'm actually going to take viewer call-ins over Skype or Discord or something, so you watching can join the actual podcast, potentially. I'll actually incorporate the chat. I'll see what people are saying in the chat and get intake from the viewers. Basically, it's not going to be you're watching this on Twitch and getting nothing out of it being here live. I want to make sure if we're doing a live podcast, it's actually going to be interactive. But at the same time, we'll put it on YouTube as well. So if you missed the live part, you can watch it on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get Jared on the call. If he's there. Let's turn up the music. Hello, Jared. Welcome to Titanfall Legends.
Hello there, everybody.
How are you doing?
Very excited to be here.
Okay.
I have been counting down the time, even though we just decided to do this today.
No, this was all planned, Jared. Don't ruin it. It was all planned.
Several years in the making.
Exactly. All right. First, before we get into any of the topics, I want Jared to just take a minute. And for anyone who doesn't know about Jared, because there are some people watching who are just from my channel, give a brief explanation of like what Titanfall Legends is, just quickly for anyone who hasn't been on the Titanfall Legends channel.
Well, Titanfall Legends is the biggest and most community-based Titanfall channel out there. We've kind of had our base built upon making news videos, keeping the community updated with any new information that is released. Over the time, we've done a lot of community-based series, such as currently we have Plays of the Week going on, where we showcase weekly plays from the community, just cool moments that they have, as well as we just restarted the top fails, funny moments, and epic moments as well, where that's a pretty great series, a lot of fun to do, have some laughs with that. And then besides that, we've also done some guides in the past, and just trying to grow the Titanfall community, as well as keeping everyone informed. And that's kind of, I guess, the gist of it.
Perfect. All right, so that is Titanfall Legends. For anyone who hasn't watched my stream in forever and you weren't really a fan of Titanfall, our whole channel was created to be the sole place where fans could get updates from the fans. We're not like endorsed by Respawn. We don't work for EA or anything. So yeah, that's Titanfall Legends. Now we're going to get right into the podcast. So as I mentioned, in the future podcast, if this goes well, we will interact with the community more, and I am going to interact with the chat. But for now, I'm just going to bounce some questions off Jared. Jared has played a lot of Titanfall 2, more so than me. I've been really busy this year. So we'll get his input and then kind of bounce it around to the chat and go from there. So the first topic we're going to talk about is the current state of the game, not balance-wise. We don't have Frothy Omen here. The current state of the game population-wise. So on Reddit Titanfall, you can see the most recent population numbers, and I was on there earlier. And although you may be playing Titanfall and feel like there's not that many people on, one thing I noticed is it hasn't really gone down at all in the past 3 months. I think the current player count numbers on Xbox One are about 12K. and PS4 around 10K. That doesn't seem like much, I guess, compared to other games, but it's been the same since, I guess, late January. Like, what have you noticed? You play on all consoles, I believe, or at least PS4 and PC. Have you noticed it's gotten, I mean, has it maintained it? Like, when you're joining a game that isn't the main lobbies, like Mixtape, is it still quick?
So for a while before the mixtape matchmaking was introduced, there was a bit of an issue trying to play anything besides attrition and pilots versus pilots a lot of the time. But since mixtape was introduced, where you can search for various game modes, it has become a lot easier. With the population, it was dropping for a little bit, but I did actually notice a rise during the free weekend, and since then things have been pretty stable around those numbers. Like you said, yeah, about 12K on the Xbox, kind of at peak times, and 10K for PS4. So it seems like right now at this point, yeah, we are still kind of going to be cruising around that number. I still do get messages from new players coming in, so people are still getting interested in the game. And I mean, just because of with all of that, I think things are going to be stable, especially for the next while, because I don't really see any signs of the population going down. So.
Right, there seems to be like a core base of people who will continue to play it. I mean, they've been playing the game for so long. It's been out for 6 months now. If you didn't see, we posted a graphic a few days ago just on all our social media. It's been 6 months since the launch of Titanfall 2, believe it or not. So there is that core user base. But that being said, do you think there's anything Respawn could do better? They've done a few free trial weekends. Like, if you were working at Respawn, is there anything you would do to just drive people who've never played it but play other FPS games into Titanfall?
So I think the biggest reason why people can stop playing Titanfall, or if they do play the free weekend and maybe not return, is that there's quite the large skill. There's a pretty big skill gap in terms of like the best player and the new player. So it can be pretty intimidating to just get into the game itself at first. For that, I'm not entirely sure what they could do. Frontier Defense, the co-op mode where you play with 3 other friends against the enemy NPCs, that will be introduced by the looks of it in the summer. We still don't have an official release for that, but I think just having more modes like that, even a playlist that would be just, say, rank 25 and under for super brand new players to get used to it. Besides that, I personally love the way Titanfall plays. I'm sure everyone here watching this does, but from just talking to other friends who are more casual players, especially of FPS games, they kind of say that Titanfall can be one of the more difficult games to break into, just because of the movement system and how, if you are good at the movement system, you really can kind of be a step above most other players who are still just getting used to it. So just being more accommodating to new players, but that's just such a general statement.
Right.
I mean,
I've read a criticism that although Titanfall 2 is a very solid game, and I'll mute that Skype there, it's actually, this has come up on the Reddit Titanfall subreddit, which I browse every few days. People feel like there's so many good players now, and there's that core base of players who've been playing for so long that it's really hard for people who have never played anything to like the movement speed of Titanfall. Like, the only game that compares to Titanfall 2 like from years ago would be something like Tribes. So anyone who's been playing FPS games since then, even the new Call of Duty games which have some movement, it's not anything near Titanfall 2. They're getting crushed when they try to join the game, and you have all these old players who just get stacked up against them, and there's like 5 Titans and they're on the ground, and they probably end up quitting because they lose every game. I felt like that's the same problem that's been there since the first game for a lot of people. It seems they couldn't get into it because they don't actually give it the time to get good at the game. Like, is there any way Respawn can do anything, or would they be breaking the game by making it, say, easier for noobs to actually have fun?
I think with Titanfall 2 in particular, there really isn't anything they can do that. Yeah, I think we just have to wait for Titanfall 3, to be honest, for them to make like really big changes. But in its current state, I don't really have any ideas personally. So I think we'll have to wait for the next iteration to, but even then, what will they change? I mean, as I've said, I'm still not completely sure. I really don't know, to be honest.
Right, it's a tough one to solve, I guess.
Because well, if they change too many things, then the reason I love Titanfall is because of the movement system. I think it does the best. It's the best with 3D movement out of any of the other FPS games out there. I mean, namely Call of Duty is the other big FPS that has had 3D movement, but it's just nowhere near how smooth Titanfall is. And to compromise that part, which could be an issue for a lot of the new players, I don't know if that would be good or not. So, I mean, I do think it's a big issue for new people. It's the movement, but yeah.
Right. So, I guess my thought on it would be this: most people who play Titanfall 2 love the game because of, I guess, the game pattern. You join a game, you're on the ground unless you're playing a Titan only mode, and you go through the motions. You're wall running everywhere. You're using the movement system. You're trying not to die. You get into your Titan, and then that cycle repeats. Most people enjoy that pattern. It's fun. It's different from Call of Duty. It's different from Battlefield. It's unique to Titanfall 2. But at the same time, I feel like Titanfall, since the first iteration, has been missing the ability for one person, unless there's someone like Iniquity Games who's in the chat, to really carry the game themselves. So is there, like, for instance, if you're playing a Call of Duty game, it surely requires luck to stay alive and get a lot of kills, but it's a lot easier to do it if there's not 4 major 20-foot tall Titans coming at you on the other team. Is there anything that like Titanfall 2 or potentially Titanfall 3 could have to make it so a normal player could actually hop into a game midway when they're losing and actually have a chance of carrying better? Because there's only so much you can do unless you're Iniquity Games or Frothy Omen or one of these top players. Whether you're in a pilot, or whether you're playing as a pilot or you're in a Titan, you can't stay alive forever, and you can't dodge everything. Because when you're in a Titan, there's tons of people shooting at you. You're not as able to get away, I guess, compared to other games. Is there anything they could do to make it more even, to where I could join the game as like a mid player and just do a lot of really good things skill-wise to actually win the game? I've always felt like Titanfall has been off in that for me. When I play games in the past, I had moments where I actually could carry the game. I did use my skill to take my team up, whereas in Titanfall, it's very hard to do that. You have to be really good at the game. Is there anything they could change there, or is that just like, that's the game? Like, it's different from these other games. It's not worth even like talking about that.
Well, I think we should talk about it, but as I think it's just the way the game is, and to make any major changes to the pace of the game, which actually Respawn did try to do back in the tech test, in terms of how fast you ran on the walls, and also a couple other movements, it actually was slower. And for the most part, at least the core Titanfall community reacted very negatively towards that. And even comparing the first weekend of the tech test back in August to the way it was after the second tech test, and with a full game, it's a lot better with the faster movement, at least I think for a lot of the core players. But then, of course, I mean, what we're talking about is getting new players, and just once people try the game, stick around, just as we're still trying to get better. I'm just still stumped. I'm in terms of the way Titans work, I think it is better in Titanfall 2. In the first game, I kind of felt like if you weren't in your Titan, well, why aren't you in your Titan? Because the way in Titanfall 2 with Titans, I think they're not as powerful, which I do agree with, and so I think it is not quite as intimidating to go up against Titans, as they are weaker in general.
Are they not as powerful just because you can't choose your weapons? Like, I guess in Titanfall 1, everyone was rolling with kind of the same Titan weapons. Is that why, or is it the actual like Titans themselves?
I'm pretty sure it's the Titans themselves. You can just kill them quicker, as I believe they have less health for the most part. In the way anti-Titans work, they do a little more damage, and also there's no shields anymore. There's batteries, but it's not nearly as protective as the shield system was in the first game. So I'm pretty sure Titans are just weaker overall, I would say.
Okay. I want to take a minute here just to include the chat. Anything we're talking about here, I am viewing the chat, so if someone wants to chime in, I'll probably relay your message if it's one that I see. So feel free to type anything in the chat here. Tsunami just said, a game with the big set of mechanics as it is, you're introducing a lot of skill necessity into the game. That leads to skill gap. If you're playing a game where you can only go forward and back and do one type of shooting, it's easy and a lot of people will get into it. If you introduce a lot of mechanics, like Titanfall 2 has, it starts getting harder. So according to him, it's just kind of the game. Like, I guess it is Titanfall. It's a harder game to get to the skill of like the top players. Like, you have to spend a ton of time. You can't just have good aim in Titanfall to be good at the game. You have to actually have like a certain skill set in this game only. So that is a good input from Tsunami there, another streamer. We're going to move on here because we have a time schedule for this. We're trying to keep it under an hour. So let's move on to the next topic here. Up next, we have this. I guess this topic has been talked about months ago. It seems to have kind of dwindled now that there's been a DLC the other week. But this topic title is the state of the game updates wise. And I put in brackets here has there been too little updates? So Titanfall 2 has had free DLC. Nobody's had to pay for anything unless you want to buy the microtransaction stuff, which isn't really an experience. It's more just to show off. So it's all been free, but it's clear that there hasn't been as much DLC as the first game in terms of at least maps. If you go back and count it, it'd be really far behind. Do you think that when Titanfall 2 launched, they had planned, this is something I thought about. Do you think that when the game launched, Respawn had planned on doing more DLC, but when they found out that it didn't sell as well, they had to kind of change their, their resources, because some people had to go work on the Star Wars game, some people had to go work on possibly the next Titanfall game. Like, do you think when Respawn realized, okay, this is not selling as well as the first game, we can't do as much DLC? Or do you think they originally only planned to do like the current DLC path that they've done?
I absolutely think they had planned to do a lot more than they have so far. I just with the amount of content that launched at the beginning with only 9 maps, that's like nowhere near the amount of the first game. Even with free DLC, they had to have planned to do a lot more. And just once they didn't see the performance they wanted, I guess EA didn't want to fund them, or I'm not sure how that works, but yeah, I really do believe that they had planned on doing like monthly DLC probably as soon as just in November, a month after the game released. They also did go on vacation in December. I'm not sure if that would have still happened if the game sold a lot more. But they just kind of weren't Respawn as a whole. The studio wasn't really working in December, which I kind of have mixed thoughts on that. But I do think that the idea was for the game to sell more than it did in order to support and create more content than we've seen so far.
Right. I guess, isn't that same worry to be there for Titanfall 3 then? I mean, I do remember reading that article a few months back, I guess 4 or 5 months back now, with Vince Zampella in an interview with some EA guy there, and there seemed to be like a ton of animosity between Vince Zampella and EA. He made some kind of statement like, you remember what happened. I forget the actual conversation, but basically EA was talking to a journalist about the future of the Titanfall series, and I'm paraphrasing, but the EA guy said something like, we will continue to support Titanfall however we can, and then Vince said, well, whatever the fuck that means.
I do recall.
It's clear that something went wrong between EA and Respawn in terms of, I guess, their partnership or their happiness towards each other. It was made clear that EA actually influenced the release date of the game, which will take me into the next topic here. Do you think that the launch window Titanfall 2, which was obviously, looking back now, not the best date, but it's easier to look back in hindsight, would you say, in your opinion, that's like one of the sole reasons that it didn't sell as well as Titanfall 1 initially? Or was there like a lack of something else?
I absolutely think the biggest reason why Titanfall 2 hasn't sold well, at least as well as everyone hoped for, was because of the release date. Of course, getting back to the gameplay, that could be a reason why players aren't staying around as much as we like. But still, if they hadn't released in between 2 of the biggest shooters, well, I guess the two biggest shooters, Battlefield and Call of Duty, literally a week in between both of them, then I think we would have seen much better sales. I would have loved to see a spring release in this year. I think that would have been optimal. And I think for Titanfall 3, we need to see like sometime in the spring, kind of when there's no other major competition, at least for the series to stick, as it still is trying to grow. So yeah, I absolutely think the release date is big, if not the number one issue for not the best sales.
I read some theories online on Reddit that the reason EA made the Titanfall 2 release date in the smack dab of the other 2 popular FPS games, Call of Duty and Battlefield,
take sales away from
there was this whole like conspiracy thing that they didn't care about the Titanfall franchise. They just wanted to detract sales from Call of Duty and put it into any other game out there as long as it's not Call of Duty growing. Do you think that has anything to do with it? Or do you think this was like purely the guys who chose this at EA messed up?
Well, so I was trying to find a report on this, and I was kind of rushing as I ended up having a bit of a nap before this one. I didn't plan. But anyways, I think Respawn actually did kind of set the release date. I'm not, this could be completely wrong, but I recall Respawn at least having some sort of influence where they wanted to, well, at least in conversation between them and EA, I do think an objective, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, was to take sales away from Call of Duty, which this was the worst performing Call of Duty yet. I don't know how much can be accredited to Titanfall instead of just the quality of Infinite Warfare, the latest Call of Duty. But I personally do kind of buy into that theory, the conspiracy theory, I guess, that yes, that was part of EA's plan to take sales away from Call of Duty. And so, yeah.
Now, there's also been talk about maybe EA, especially after that Vince Zampella kind of drama came out, EA potentially not being the developer, not the developer, the publisher for Titanfall 3. And that's going to take us directly into the next topic. Titanfall 3 has not been completely confirmed yet, correct?
Yeah, there's been no official word. The last thing we've heard about Titanfall 3 is that from Vince Zampella is just that they're unsure of where it's going to go for now. So yeah, that's all we know officially.
There's been like some talk about whether Titanfall 3 would still have EA publishing it. Say if EA decided we're not going to do it, you guys didn't make us enough money, we want to end the contract. Would it be possible for Respawn to find someone else? And I thought about this for a while. I'm sure most people in the chat, I saw some people saying EA sucks in the chat, KOS. There's been like a general kind of feeling about EA for years now that they're not the best publisher for whatever reason. I thought about this, whether Respawn would actually choose another publisher, and I don't think it's going to happen for the sole reason that the Star Wars game is happening. Right. EA is going to be the publisher of that game. They had a successful other Star Wars game, Star Wars Battlefront, that made a lot of money. So if EA is working on them like intensely with that game, they posted a picture the other day of some motion capture, which is probably from the Star Wars game. And that's probably going to be a huge game. Like that next Star Wars game is definitely going to be bigger than Titanfall 2 in sales, just for the fact it has Star Wars on the name. Like that's one of the biggest selling like franchises in human history. For that reason, I don't think Respawn would be with another publisher for Titanfall 3 because they're already like ingrained in their company now. Do you think they would, still be publishing the next Titanfall if there is one?
Yeah, well, first off, I don't know who else they could even go to. Of course, but they're not going to go back to Activision, as Vince Zampella is the CEO, and there's a huge lawsuit back then, so that the Activision is not an option. Besides that, I guess I don't think. Yeah, I really think they are going to stick with EA, and then also mentioning the Star Wars game. At least from my understanding, quite a few of the developers on the Titanfall series have also kind of switched over to Star Wars, or some of them kind of work on both a bit. So to tear apart like the Respawn in terms of where developers are working between two different publishers, and I just think it could get incredibly messy. So I don't think they will. In terms from EA's perspective, I don't have an exact quote in front of me, but they thought Titanfall 2 did all right. So at least from EA's perspective, they will continue to support the Titanfall series. At least that's what I took away from it. So it's more so on Respawn, I guess. If anyone doesn't know, EA doesn't actually own Respawn, so Respawn is free to theoretically do whatever they wanted. If they did want to go with another publisher, they could, of course. But I don't think it would be a good decision. I'd love to see a better release date and more marketing. Marketing is another issue that I did have. I just didn't believe there was enough money put into what we ended up getting in terms of advertisements.
I feel like where they messed up the most, like where I actually started to have some fear for the release date of Titanfall 2. Back when I heard it was going to be released in the fall, whenever they announced that before the summer, around the start of the summer, maybe it was E3, I didn't think it was that bad of a decision. But when the what did they call the beta for Titanfall 2? It had another name. It wasn't. It's
the pre-alpha tech test. Was the full name?
Right. For starters, I don't know why they chose that name for which it was a beta really. They chose pre-alpha tech test, like a name that's never been really used before for something like this.
Actually, one thing I want to say, so Respawn, the reason they called it that is because it was actually a super old build. Like it came from the beginning of June when it was released in August, which I still don't understand why they did that. Of course, they should have still called it the beta, but technically it wasn't in beta stage, but just for marketing purposes, yeah, they should have called it a beta. But I don't know why they also released something so old at the time. Like it was 2.5 months outdated.
I always felt like the first thing I thought of is the reason they called that. And if anyone's wondering in the chat, why does it matter that they chose that name? From a marketing standpoint, that's a really weird name to choose. Like when I first read that, I'm like, what is a pre-alpha tech test? oh, it's like a beta. Well, then they should have just called it like a beta test, because then everyone knows what that means. The reason I thought they chose that is like they were trying to stick it to other games that release a beta, which really isn't going to change anything anyways. So it's not really a beta. It's like a demo. Like that's the first thing I thought of, is maybe they're trying to stick it to these other games that release these betas, which aren't real betas, and they didn't want to do that. So they'll call it something completely different, so everyone knows it's not technically going to change the game. I don't know. Like whoever made that decision, I think messed up, because it should have been called the Titanfall 2 beta. Everyone knows what that means, and there would have been more people on. Anyways, like I said, the first time I felt fear for the Titanfall 2 release date was when the beta came, and there really wasn't much hype for the beta. To be fair, the Titanfall 1 beta was like a new franchise. Everyone knew it was from the creators of Call of Duty, so it makes sense why that one was bigger. But just the hype for the tech test was much lower, and they only announced it, I believe, about 5 days before, because this is when Gamescom was happening, and I was there for that. And they only announced the tech test a few days before it even happened. I feel like that was the first error. They really messed up in promoting that tech test and marketing it and getting people to get excited about testing this new Titanfall game.
Yeah, just in with my close friends who are all avid gamers, none of them knew about the tech tests until I mentioned it to them. They hadn't heard a single word, while back with the original Titanfall, it seemed like everyone was talking about it at the time. So there needed to be a lot more promotion and hype built up, because, well, even the release date of the tech test wasn't announced until just like a day or two before it actually took place. And they didn't even, well, as you said, reference the tech test itself until just like 5-6 days before anything, well, before it went live. So yeah, I'm just saying that I do agree with that.
Right. And I guess Tsunami raises a point in the chat. He said their intent was to stress test their new cloud and bare metal server system, which I get from like a technical standpoint, sure. But like from a marketing standpoint, I would have done a beta, and I would have called it a beta, or just called it a beta. Like they don't have to tell anyone what it really is. It's not like that unethical if they're doing a little separate developmental test in the background, and they're also just calling it a beta for marketing purposes. Tons of games do that, and it seems to work really well. But yeah, I felt the marketing for the tech test was really bad. A lot of people, like you said, just didn't know about it. It came out that day, and on Twitch, I believe it was live stream. Yes, it was like it was public to live stream. It wasn't big at all on Twitch. People didn't even know about it. I was watching other big streamers that day, and people were trying to donate to these big streamers, telling them, oh, Titanfall 2 is playable. And these big streamers were like, oh, really? I didn't even know there was a Titanfall 2. So yeah, people just didn't know about it, at least in huge online communities, which are really important for these tech tests. Like Twitch does play a major factor in like building hype for these betas. Anytime there's a beta for a new game, it seems to get, if it's a big game, tons of viewers on this website. So that was a huge issue. We'll just move on, because we could continue talking about that for a long time, like the whole lack of hype for the game. So I want to move on back to the actual gameplay itself here. The next topic we have is the game modes in Titanfall 2. Now, I want to try to get some input from the chat on this as well, because we have lots of people in the chat who play Titanfall 2 every day. They play the game modes that they like. They're on there all the time. My question about the game modes is, I always thought that Titanfall as a franchise, back when Titanfall 1 was coming out, I always thought it was going to have like this signature game mode that was Titanfall. Because they weren't coming from any other FPS game. I mean, they were coming from Call of Duty, but they were creating this brand new franchise, and they could create whatever imaginative game mode to like be the signature mode for Titanfall that they could. They were on new grounds. They could choose anything. They didn't have to base it off anything else. But the one area where they messed up on was that they based all their game modes off of like other FPS games. I mean, attrition, team deathmatch, you can go down the list. They were not very creative with their game modes for Titanfall 1, in my opinion, at all. And for Titanfall 2, it's gotten a little more creative, and they're seeming to imply that they want to try more with these temporary game modes. I just don't know why for Titanfall 1 and then Titanfall 2, when they had their second chance, why they didn't create more original modes that take a while to think up, that aren't just like a copy from another game. Why hasn't there been more creative, original Titanfall game modes?
I don't have the answer to that. That's always been a thought that I've had as well. There's a lot they could do with how Titanfall works, and to just base it off of, well, these other modes. Like, you can pretty much take any game mode from Titanfall and compare them to something else. Um, Also, with Titanfall 2, has may change the direction a little bit. I personally have been kind of disappointed with the lack of Titan focus modes besides LTS. And well, with that being said, it's just that there seems to be a lot more of a emphasis on pilots versus pilots. Even getting back to the tech test, that was one of the game modes. While I mean, of course, the name of the series is Titanfall, so I'm not sure why they've been trying to promote that. And then even with the game mode like Live Fire. There are people that do enjoy it, but I think that Respawn, that is one of their weakest parts with them, is that they're not quite sure what to do with the game modes. I mean, of course, made as evident with the game modes we do have currently. I'm glad to see that we're finally getting these featured modes that are going to be, I guess, cycled every week. It looks at this point that they're going to try to have a voting-based system. There's currently, for anyone unaware, you can vote for what you want to be the next featured game mode to be. There's a couple LTS modes, some variations of them, as well as Mark for Death. But well, with that being said, I think I'm glad to see that they are trying to experiment with different things now, and just trying out to see what works. Maybe they just wanted to not get too risky, as a big part with the original Titanfall and also the game. Well, even if we do go back to the conspiracy theory of taking sales away from Call of Duty, is they are trying to take a lot of the Call of Duty crowd to come and start to get into Titanfall, so making modes that are very similar to it. I mean, I guess that's probably a thought that they've had and focused around a lot. So yeah, I hope that we'll see some more experimental modes with these the new featured system that they're implementing finally. And just kind of see what works out.
Yeah, I guess that is a good point, because the game itself, the franchise itself, was so different. Maybe they thought if they went too different, people couldn't get into it at all. So they had to have some of the aspects of other games that everyone's just gotten used to, like attrition and these other game modes, kind of there. It could be that, yeah, that could be logical. But I just feel like there could have been at least 2 game modes in Titanfall 1 and 2 game modes in Titanfall 2 that I could have came up with. And I'm just a lawn chair developer. I don't know anything. But I even did a post one time with like 10 original game modes to the Titanfall Reddit. And tons of people were posting their own, and there were some good ideas there, and we're not developers, but I just feel like they could have been a little more imaginative, a little more creative with the game modes. There could have been something that was more signature to the Titanfall franchise. I guess Last Titan Standing, that would be really the one that sticks out in my mind, or I guess Mark for Death, but that's not what I pictured originally, that like Titanfall wouldn't have like a very original mode, something like, I guess, specific to Titanfall. One that I remember posting to the Titanfall Reddit was a game mode called, what I don't know if I posted it, maybe somebody else did, but the name of the game mode was like Titan King. And it would start where everyone spawns as a Titan in the map, and it's basically a free-for-all. Or sorry, not as a Titan. Everyone would spawn as a player in the map, and it's a free-for-all. Then a random thing would spawn on the map, like a flag. Whoever touches that flag first becomes the Titan King. At that point, they have to kill all the other pilots as quick as they can, and all these other pilots, like a swarm from like StarCraft, will try to attack the Titan and kill it with all their anti-Titan weapons, or whatever weapon they had of choice. And whoever gets the final blow, or maybe the most damage on that Titan, then becomes the Titan King. And then the cycle continues like that until the Titan King gets enough points or something. I don't know. There were tons of very good ideas that were like, whoa, I never heard of like a game mode. Like, I guess that's kind of like Infected, but very original ideas that just, I don't know, never really got noticed, or never really, maybe they got thought of. Once again, we're lawn chair developers. We don't, I guess, have the knowledge or like time constraints and like money constraints that the developers at Respawn do. We can sit here and like think up stuff forever, and it's not a big deal. Whereas at Respawn, they're paid by the hour. They have to come up with like practical solutions that, you know, they're managed and whatnot. Anyways, we'll move on to another topic here. see what we got left. We've gone over the state of the game. Right, this is the one we missed earlier. I want to also get some feedback on the chat on this one, because I know we've had a few people in the chat, like Iniquity, Tsunami, who have played somewhat competitively, at least skill-wise, in the past. And this topic is the competitive scene in Titanfall 2, which I put in brackets is basically non-existent right now. For Titanfall 1, there seemed to be... Sure, there was never like an actual scene in the sense that there were like ladders or anything, but there seemed to be constant tournaments and people organizing things. And you still see tournaments on the Titanfall Reddit, but it's much, much lower compared to Titanfall 1. Like, I would say the competitive scene is practically dead right now. And that leads me to the question here. Is Titanfall just destined to be like a casual game?
I think there's a lot of potential for it to be a competitive game, but Respawn themselves have said they're against it. There's actual multiple employees from Respawn, and I recall Vincent Pella even have said they don't care for competitive. I believe someone even said they don't want to see a competitive scene for the game. And I don't know why, because I honestly do believe with how skilled you have to be in order to actually play decently, to play the game, I think that can make for some absolutely fantastic gameplay just to watch as a viewer, to see all these crazy mechanics and implementing the movement system to its fullest potential. And I think just the reason why there isn't that big of a competitive scene is just due to the fact that there's not a big general playing population. But in the case that the game itself was bigger, I think there is quite an opportunity for the competitive scene to grow as a whole. Because, I mean, as you've said, yeah, it's not gigantic as of right now. I think I personally know of at least all of the competitive teams, and there's only a handful of them. So it is definitely not a gigantic community. I don't want to speak too much on it personally, as I'm not the most invested into the scene. So I don't know if Iniquity or Tsunami or anyone else who has more experience in there wants to kind of talk about how the community is over there, maybe in more detail. But anyways, I think maybe we could see a scene, but just that there has to be a bigger playing population as a whole. And Respawn should at least try to give more of a nod to competitive instead of outright shunning it like they have a couple times in the past.
One thing I never understood, I guess, if Respawn decided that they don't want to focus on competitive in terms of putting a ton of money and a ton of resources into it, like, that's fair to me. They have their like data and they're looking at where they want to take the game, and that makes sense. If you don't want to put a ton of manpower and money into trying competitive.
I just want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
One thing, I don't know why they've taken so long to change is private match. I think this kind of exemplifies that they don't want to support it at all, because in private match, the only options have been to choose a game mode and a map, but beyond that, you can't change anything else. I mean, in Titanfall 1, you could change a lot of the values of, well, what you want the score limit to be and time. So anyways, I just remember that. So
right, like small things that like you think wouldn't take that long, that they kind of just to the people who care about that stuff, like it's basically oh well, we'll try it again in the next game. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, they know that like 99% of players who play on a daily basis don't really care anyways, so they're just going to focus on them and not them. But yeah, there has been complaints about that. But once again, it's like such a small population that really care about like the intricacy of a private match setting that it's obviously probably not the biggest priority to them. But one thing I didn't understand, if they don't want to put a ton of money into competitive play or into building anything competitive, why couldn't they at least just host a tournament a month? Like, host a tournament, pick two of your developers to sit on a couch in the Respawn HQ, like put a camera on the community manager, and host a tournament every month that everyone, I guess you'd have to have a way to enter, maybe make it random draw, do whatever you want. Just host a tournament every month where everyone watches it on Twitch and the winner gets like $1,000, or just something small, like something that's not a big amount to a company like Respawn or EA. I don't know why they couldn't do something like that. Like something very basic that is more for the viewer than like anything else, and that brings in more viewers from Twitch and other games.
Well, it's just because Respawn doesn't want us to support competitive, and I think that's the only answer we could have to that. Yeah, I think that's simply. I mean, that's simply all that we can really say. I don't see any other reasons why they couldn't do something like that. So they don't want competitive, I think is all that. I mean, it's the only thing to say for now.
Right. It's Blue Flare says $1,000 not a lot, fam. Well, it's obviously a lot to like the average person, but to like a company that makes millions and millions in revenue, I'm sure that Respawn and EA on marketing alone spent, I mean, millions for Titanfall 2. So like, what's another $1,000 a month to try something out? Like that's very small compared to what their budgets and like revenue would be. But moving on, that covers competitive. I think I had one additional one I didn't include earlier.
I just wanted to say with spending, I'm pretty sure it's like $10,000 or $20,000 to launch like a patch update anyways. So I mean, just for anyone like that, they do spend quite a bit of money. Even with the free updates, it does cost money to put them onto the Xbox marketplace as well as PlayStation. And so anyways, there's...
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess Titanfall's never hosted tournaments, but they did do a few events where like the developers played. I mean, there were a few live streams where they tried to get people on there and, you know, get the community going a little bit. And they held a few kind of back for Titanfall 1. I don't know if they did for Titanfall 2, but back for Titanfall 1, they did hold a few competitions. If you remember that, they had like a weekly competition where you had to get the most kills and post a screenshot or whatever. There were things like that, but they didn't seem to do anything that actually would bring in new players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I forget them doing that, so I don't have anything to say on that. But yeah, there's not a lot of interest or effort from them.
Right. I want to scroll up because someone said something in the chat that I meant to copy. I feel like we're going back to Tsunami a lot, but he seems to have some good points. Tsunami said, and people saying that the game is dead from the start because of the lack of the competitive scene is false. Because the problem with the game is the skill gap. Non-experienced players will leave and the hardcore, more competitive players stay. It was like that in Titanfall 1, and it's getting to that point in Titanfall 2. How would you feel about that? Does that sound accurate to you, or would you have like a counter to that?
That I completely, it may be bad podcasting, but no, I completely agree with the statement myself. Yeah.
Tsunami does seem to have some good points here. Maybe we'll have to get Tsunami on sometime.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of not on the list, but a Butterbar Gaming mentioned, he says, I got to give Respawn credit that they lower the price of the game to help grow the community. I'm not sure how big of a help that is. I think it's definitely a smart move that they lowered the price because you can usually get it for around $30 to $40, sometimes $20. There's been a couple of times with that, but I'm not sure how big of a help that is. I don't know what your thoughts are on that for the lower price at this point.
Well, speaking of the price, I guess that was a big, I mean, kick in the teeth to a lot of players, even myself, I guess, when the game comes out in back in the fall and it launches for the normal price of, you know, $59, $90, $60. In some cases in Canada, $70 just for the standard game because our dollar is weaker. So you pay $70 in Canada to get this game, or $60 in the US. And then literally 3 weeks later, the game drops on a Black Friday sale. And I mean, there was going to be sales anyways, but it dropped like 50% because of the lack of sales. So a lot of people did feel kind of ripped off that they paid that much for the game, expecting it to be like Titanfall, where Titanfall 1, when it launched, it did eventually drop, but it didn't drop to the extent Titanfall 2 did on the price within the first month. I think it took a few months. Like Titanfall 1 with the Xbox One launch did sell really well for the first few months. So, I mean, myself and I'm sure a lot of other people were kind of pissed off that they ended up paying $60 for this game. And in some cases, like you and I would buy multiple copies and then it just drops like 50% in the first 3 weeks. That was kind of the first, oh, this isn't going to be Titanfall 1, like community-wise or player number-wise.
And then I think to other people just looking at that from afar, they may say, well, why did this game drop off in price so much? Is this going to be a bad game? Should I even be interested? Should I purchase this even though it's a lot cheaper? Yeah. Why would a gigantic AAA title drop like half in price just not even a full month after it released? Is
right. It raises doubts for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's too bad. Like, I guess in hindsight, I'm sure if Respawn and EA could go back in time, they would have pushed this game back into the fall or until another date and tried it again.
Into the spring, you mean? Or...
Oh yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Not the fall, into the spring. Maybe the same launch date as Titanfall 1. That could have been like Call of Duty launches at the time it does in the fall. That could have been Titanfall's time in the spring. But I mean, it's the past now. The last thing I wanted to go over very quickly, and I don't want to rip on EA or Respawn too much because that's not the point of this podcast. It's just to raise ideas and talk about things. But in terms of the hype and marketing for Titanfall 2, I guess my biggest qualm and my biggest frustration completely regarding EA, not Respawn, is how it seems that for Titanfall 1, there was an insane amount of hype. It was launched and marketed so heavily with the Xbox One. It was, I think, claimed to be like the most innovative game, the best game in the advertisements. They said, you know, the best game of the year, the most hyped game, whatever. They really overhyped Titanfall 1, and that led to some criticism from like reporters and journalists and players that like, guys, you hyped this game too much. And then I guess what EA took from that, from my perspective, for Titanfall 2 is they took, okay, well, we're not going to hype it as much for Titanfall 2 because we don't want people feeling like we're not a good company, or we don't want people feeling like we overhyped the game. And this isn't just like an opinion, because I actually had a conversation on Twitter with someone from EA. I'm not going to name who they are because that wouldn't be good practice, but I had a conversation with somebody who works in marketing for EA on Twitter, and I asked him one day, I was just curious, this was back before Titanfall 2 launched, I was curious and I said, hey man, why aren't you guys hyping up the game more, like to the same extent that you hyped up Titanfall 1? And then I told him, if I was working for you, I would do this and I would do this. And I was just like, it was just basic things. It was like, put out a teaser every week or put out some pictures on Twitter of like sneak peeks of the game, just very basic stuff. Anyone in the chat could come up with this if you were on a marketing team and someone was paying you like $50 an hour or whatever. And then he replied to me with this very kind of short, and it seemed like a defensive reply. And he said, we don't like to hype anything up. And then he said, if you want to apply for marketing, go ahead. So that to me was when I realized like, oh, okay, this game is probably not going to sell that well. Because if you don't want to hype up a game on a marketing end, what do you expect? You may get the people who buy it, the few people who buy it, to be happier about it. But for the people who don't know about it, you're not going to make any money off those people. They're not going to be playing the game. They're not going to be joining your community. So that was kind of sad to me when that guy told me that, when he basically told me that they intentionally were not hyping up the game as much as they did for Titanfall 1.
I don't understand that thought process even a little bit. They're gaming. Well, they're in gaming. They're a business. They're selling a product. Why would they not want as many people to know about it as possible to sell well? I mean, as you said with the first game, yeah, it was overhyped, but I think from a lot of people and how they remembered the first game, even if Titanfall 2 was marketed at that same level, they may be a little more cautious about it. They may have their expectations in a different place because they know how the first game was. So I don't think they're like that would be an issue. I don't think it would even be possible to get overhyped to the point that it was if they were to put more money into marketing, just more effort into it. But for someone to just say that they don't want to hype it, I can't even begin to understand their perspective on that. That doesn't, at least to me, that doesn't make any sense.
The last thing I'll add on the lack of hype or the lack of proper marketing, and it's clear they put a ton of money into marketing. Some of the trailers on Titanfall 2 on YouTube, like the Bang Bang one and the Linkin Park one.
That's what I say with me saying all this. I'm not trying to make it sound like they did nothing. I just think they could have done more. Like they did do some pretty, they did all right marketing, at least in terms of trailers, as you were saying. But anyways.
Yeah, like that Bang Bang trailer was pretty cool, but I still don't know why for Titanfall 2 they didn't have a trailer, like a launch trailer, that was showing like viewers in the chat, when you think of Titanfall 2, this is just going to be a little quiz here. When you think of Titanfall 2 or Titanfall in general, I want you to type in the chat one word that you think of. Just the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Titanfall 2. Go ahead and type it in the chat.
Dude.
Dude?
Yeah.
Myself, what I would think of, the first word I think of is fun. Like, it's fun. When you get into the groove of Titanfall 2, the pattern of Titanfall 2, it's fun. And I don't know why for Titanfall 2 on a marketing end, they didn't put out a trailer that displayed how fun the game was. They more went with like these kind of like very visually cool, oh, what is this kind of trailer.
Oh yeah, they had like 3 cinematic trailers.
Yeah, which were really cool from like, I guess, a cinematic standpoint, but they didn't have a trailer that like screamed, this game is like the most fun you're ever going to have. Don't miss out. They more were like, this is some kind of major atmospheric environment. I would have done a trailer. I would have like directed or told the people who direct the trailers to make a trailer that shows how fast paced the game is. And I mean, they did a few. They did the multiplayer one with that song, but they didn't do a launch trailer really displaying the fun of the game like a week before and pushed that out. They more went for these very like atmospheric cinematic trailers. I don't know. That's the last point I wanted to make. I wish they try to display like how fun the game can be when you get in that good cycle in the game, more like right before the game launched.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that sums up everything. We've covered all the topics here today. Did you want to bring up a topic? Because we still have, I guess, a few minutes here. We're at about 48 minutes into the podcast. We're going to be summing this up soon. My goal with these podcasts for everyone watching is to stay under an hour, because we're going to be uploading these to the Titanfall Legends YouTube channel. And I know that most people, when they see a video that's like 3 hours long, they're probably going to consider not watching that. And even an hour is kind of long. So I'd like to keep these in like the 40-minute range. I guess we went a little over today, but I want it to be a length that's not too long. But anyways, we're just wrapping up here. So Jared, did you have like a topic you wanted to post to the chat, or just something that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, one thing that was on my mind, especially back when, just at the beginning, when we were talking about introducing new players into the series, is, I'm not sure if you remember, Jax, but there was a survey going around from EA that referenced a lot of elements from a Titanfall MMO game, which I personally, I've kind of gone back and forth on, but at this point, I think that if they were to potentially, in between Titanfall 2 and Titanfall 3, and well, I'm sure they're already far into development on their next title, or at least just laying the groundwork for it. Or anyways, I think an MMO where it's a lot more casual, where you can play with your friends in like an RPG style, maybe could work out, because especially with the lore that surrounds Titanfall, there's just a lot to go into with the universe itself. Maybe if they could do something like that and then still release Titanfall 3 in the formal arcade shooter. I don't know if the chat has any thoughts on that, but I think that could potentially be something that could help the series a lot, is to have a new take on it in the form of a massive game like that.
Huh. Wait, so can you like clarify that? What do you mean by that, like exactly?
Well, potentially comparing it to a game like Destiny a little bit, in terms of where it's an FPS, but you're able to go on these, you're able to do these, like, well, have a full-out single player where you can play along with your friends, or do these raids where it's a lot more PvE focused, where you're playing against.
Okay, so actually like kind of turning the game into just like a little arcade shooter to something more, basically. Yeah,
and maybe still have that element in there, or, well, as I was saying, potentially having like this MMO series be an offshoot, just giving it one attempt to see if they can create something like that. Of course, that's a very massive project. I'm sure even bigger than creating just another arena shooter for Titanfall 3. But I theoretically, I think that could be something that would be fantastic.
I guess you have to wonder like what the atmosphere is like at Respawn right now. Is it tense? Like, we really don't know if there's going to be a Titanfall 3. We really hope there is, because if there isn't, it's not going to be the best for our channel and our community, obviously, because we banked on Titanfall Legends as a community of people who want to stay up to date and get the news of Titanfall 2, see the top plays and everything. So if Titanfall were to stop, it wouldn't be good for us. But you have to think, at Respawn, the atmosphere must be very different than what it was going into Titanfall 2 right now. Like, there has to be a lot more.
I think there's a lot of shifting going around with their employees, because they're still currently looking for a bunch of new people. So I think that maybe a decent chunk of them left, like the developers left after Titanfall 2's results. Also, some of them did move to Star Wars, their title as well. But yeah, I think that there probably is. They're still possibly questioning what they're going to do. I mean, of course, they've already had discussions on where they're going to head, but I'd say definitely, at least if I was there, probably not as confident as they were at like this time last year. Yeah.
Awesome 9612 says Titanfall RPG would not work at all. Titans would not fit into any kind of player versus player versus, and Titanfall does not have a story to keep it going for a year. I guess that's the last topic we will discuss here today to segue this. I think I want to have a very quick discussion with the chat and with you, Jared, about the Titanfall 2 campaign. I know that it's been generally received very well. The general reviews on the Titanfall 2 campaign were that some of the levels it had were super creative, like that time-shifting level, that the story was decent, that there were emotional moments, that overall the campaign was like solid. It was probably for a lot of people the high point of Titanfall 2. Even a lot of streamers, they were playing it and they seemed to enjoy it. But I want to bring up the idea that the Titanfall 2 campaign was actually not the best route for Titanfall to go. And my reasoning for this was in Titanfall 1, the whole atmosphere of the campaign, which was a multiplayer campaign, was dividing the factions, was really focusing on the IMC versus the militia, the M Corps. And you had this sense when you joined Titanfall 1 of that battle going on. And even if you joined and you were about to play as the IMC in the pregame lobby, you had the IMC music. And then if you were about to play as the militia, you had the militia music. And there was this whole atmosphere of the IMC versus the militia. For Titanfall 2, they just decided to like basically forget about all of that and just go with a very basic story that's kind of like the Call of Duty stories where you have the good guy who is Jack Cooper. Clearly, they took away the kind of gray area where you didn't really know for sure who was the good and the bad guy. And they were basically like, Jack Cooper is the hero. The militia is basically the good guys because the IMC is basically trying to create a Death Star. I just feel like it was a very off-track way to go compared to what they were setting up in the first game. I always thought maybe for Titanfall 2, this was just wishful thinking for me. I wish they did something along the lines of, instead of just playing as Jack Cooper, you played as Jack Cooper, and then you played as his long-lost brother from the IMC. So you played one mission as Jack Cooper on his point of view, and you got to see the inside of his soldiers and what they think of the IMC and the citizens. And then the next mission, you're playing as Joe from the IMC or another generic name like Jack. And you get to see the IMC's perspective. And it goes back and forth. And it's not like this is the good guy, this is the bad guy. You actually would get to have a balanced point of view of both of these factions and these characters. And then you could decide who's the good guy. You could make like the ethical decision in your own brain of who's actually good and who's bad. And then at the end of the game, I don't know, maybe you could like choose which one you play for the final mission or something. Like something that's actually more balanced and more like Game of Thrones-esque, where you don't really know for sure who's good and who's bad, and it's a lot more gray, much like real life. What do you think about that? Like, I know that Titanfall 2 as a campaign was good in terms of the acting and story and voice acting and everything, but do you think it was too basic? That's kind of a thought I've had.
So I love the campaign. I thought it was a fantastically done for the most part. With that said, yes, the story itself could have been a lot stronger. But I don't think they should get rid of the campaign. If Titanfall 3 comes along, I really do hope they do a formal campaign like they did with Titanfall 2. But in terms of just pure story to dig into with the lore, there was so much more in the first game. I was trying to work on a Titanfall 2 lore video, but there's just nothing to talk about besides of what is explicitly explained in the campaign itself. So yes, I do agree on that point. I wish there was more to dig into. But at the same time, a lot more of the casual fan base don't want to have to dig around for all this extra stuff going on with the story that's not necessarily explained to them. So I think it would have been cool if they would have also had potentially a multiplayer campaign that maybe at least references the main campaign itself to go along with it. Because as you were mentioning, the first game, it was a lot more atmospheric for sure. And this game, it doesn't feel as lively out of the frontier as it did.
Like, I guess I don't want to sound like I'm putting it down. This Titanfall 2 is definitely more personal, like bar none. Like you actually had attachments. In Titanfall 1, you didn't have an attachment to anyone. Even when Barker died in Titanfall 1, that was the guy in the Demeter mission. When I was playing that mission, I don't know if people in the chat feel the same. When I was playing that mission, I didn't even realize that guy died. because I was just so disconnected
yeah.
from what was going on because the cutscenes were so small and in the corner. Like the Titanfall 1 multiplayer campaign was bad. Like it had no personal connection at all. So Titanfall 2 definitely had that personal connection to the characters, but I just feel like it lacked on, like you said, an atmospheric sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, as I also did mention, potentially for Titanfall 3.
Oh, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Not Barker. McAllen. Thank you for correcting me there, Uber Panzer. McAllen, the guy who died trying to kill Blisk, I believe it was. Or not kill Blisk. He sacrificed himself. Right. Anyways, continue.
Anyways, but yeah, potentially. Well, yeah, I still think there should be a core campaign, but having the two perspectives, that's a cool idea at this point, because we did, well, at least from the perspective of Jack Cooper in the second game, some people have said it would be awesome to get a full campaign for Titanfall 3.
Wait, sorry to interrupt you again.
From the perspective, yeah.
This just made me think. In that Demeter mission, you know how McAllen sacrificed himself and killed all those soldiers, everything blew up? How the hell did Blisk live? He literally left that inner area with like 20 seconds before it happened. And I guess like this guy just teleported like Harry Potter style, like apparated to the ship. How did Blisk survive that when every other soldier who was around couldn't get evac'd in like in the same time frame? How did Blisk survive?
I believe he wasn't on the planet at that point. I don't think so. I could be wrong.
Oh wait, I'm thinking of the wrong guy. Who was with him? There was an IMC guy.
I'm trying to remember because I thought you.
I keep messing up the characters. Not Blisk. Does anyone remember in the Demeter mission you had McAllen in the little nuclear area, and then you had an IMC guy who was trying to kill him? Does anyone remember who that character was?
Yeah, I'm not able to remember myself right now.
I mean, it was Blisk, but yes, he did get away. But like, I remember playing it, and Blisk was like, "Oh, he has gone inside the reactor. I guess it's time for me to leave." And somehow Blisk gets on a ship within like 30 seconds. I don't know. I feel like that was kind of a strange thing. Anyways, we've gone way off topic here, so we'll just you can go back to what you were saying there.
I gotta be honest, I kind of forgot what I was saying. But just with the story for Titanfall 3. There is a lot of potential still for where they could go, and I actually really love the idea of the multiple perspectives, switching between the two and making it more vague for who the good and bad guy is. Because with the first game, it was never explicitly explained, and a lot of the time, I mean, well, part of it was you could make your own decision, but still, I think there should be a formal campaign, and yeah, I guess that's kind of. At least kind of where I'm at with the campaign. I just if there was more besides, just more to like research and expand into beyond the main campaign. And like I said, I think if they also had like a multiplayer campaign that kind of complemented the main campaign, for if you could like hear subtle things, I don't know what, I'm kind of tripping over my words now, but I would still love the MMO. Getting back to that, I think that would be great for the story, and there's a lot to be told. And
yeah, basically, you just feel like there should be a lot more. I mean, I guess we agree on that. On some kind of like lore level, there should have been more than just lore is kind of on the side. And we're playing as Jack Cooper, and we have to survive, and we're on Typhoon, and it's dangerous. Like, we didn't really get to learn that much. Like, would it be fair to say in Titanfall 1, we actually learned more about the lore of the game than in Titanfall 2, somehow?
There was more lore as a whole. In terms of just talking about how they relate to like an actual story, I think maybe we had more, well, in the second game, but from like a lore sense, from trying to put everything together, there's a lot more in the first game. But as like a complete story, I don't know if we can. I don't know how I would compare them. I think they both offered quite a bit of the story. It's just I do like how much more vague and how you could kind of put your own thoughts and opinions on who you thought was actually the villain and such in the first game. But
right,
yeah.
I think we'll leave it there. Maybe we'll do a topic in a future episode on the lore, like go back through everything and actually try to explore some more things. I had a guy on my Skype a while ago He got kind of weird on me. He started sending me some strange messages, so I removed him. But I could try to get in contact. Yeah.
So he contacted me. He was gonna help me put together a Titanfall 2 lore video. Like he mentioned you as well, and then he just disappeared 4 months ago.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's gonna work.
He sent me this message to clarify for anyone watching. There was this guy who was very into the Titanfall lore. Like this guy dedicated like weeks of his life into learning everything there is to know about the Titanfall lore, because I guess you can listen to all the grunts in Titanfall 1 and get more itty bits of knowledge and then piece it together. He did all that, and this guy knew everything, and he was going to create this lore script for us and kind of do a co-video for Titanfall Legends. Anyways, a few weeks ago, he sent me a very odd message. He said something like, hey, Jackson Dale, this is so-and-so. Just wanted to tell you, you better watch out that I have your Skype, or something strange like that. Like he was like, you better watch out. Things can happen when your Skype is just out there. So I removed him and blocked him. But maybe we can find somebody else who knows a lot about the lore.
Someone says he should be on TFL. No, that wouldn't happen.
All right,
he's going to be the next host.
We'll leave it there for now. This was the first episode of Future of the Frontier, a Titanfall 2 podcast. The first thing I want to ask the Titanfall Legends in the chat, or any other viewers who aren't a part of the channel but that are just watching from the Titanfall 2 section in Twitch, what do you think of this podcast? This was purely a test. Jared and I didn't plan this at all. I mean, really, like I literally just messaged Jared a few hours ago saying, hey, are you available tonight to do this podcast? So this was very random. It's just something I've had in mind for a while and I wanted to test out. So what do you think? Is this something you would actually want to watch on a weekly basis? Do you enjoy this? Do you have any other tips? And like I said at the start of the episode, I want to incorporate more of the viewers by doing call-ins and by bringing on more guests like Iniquity Games or Tsunami or other people. So feel free to leave any feedback in the chat. And I feel like I could have done a bit better job incorporating the chat. It just kind of gets distracting when you're thinking of these topics and then you forget to read the chat, or you had a good message but then you forgot about it. So I apologize if anyone had a really good message and it didn't get read. Jared, do you have any other like final thoughts or like questions to the chat or anything?
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming on out. I kind of wanted to do a podcast for a while, and well, of course, this is more so your podcast. But I mean, I'm glad that we finally have this. I think there's a lot we could do with this as a whole. I'm just excited to see what we could do with it. One criticism that maybe I can talk to you offline, but anyways, it's not a big thing. Is that we should potentially have some gameplay playing in the background as well. That'd be a nice addition. But besides that. Yeah, I'm excited to see
that's a good idea. We should have something visual for next time. I saw a few people mention that in the chat. I like that idea. We definitely could get some good gameplay or something going on in the background.
And also one thing Iniquity said, which I kind of have been feeling throughout this entire episode, is that we should try to maybe be a little more, well, he says that he thinks we should try to be a little more positive, which we're just trying to be critical in this episode to kind of talk about kind of the issues of the game, but we're not always going to be down on why things didn't sell. We'll talk about other stuff that's just has more so to do with Titanfall 2 itself and like new modes and stuff like that as well, I'm sure.
For sure. There's like a balance there. I think that we should definitely voice our opinion on anything that's like valid criticism, because I guarantee there's probably at least like one Respawn employee watching this right now, like in the chat. I do have a lot of Respawn employees on my channel when I used to stream, so criticism, especially when it's not just angsty, but actually valid in the terms of a lot of people's minds, it could actually get relayed to Respawn just by doing something like this. So criticism, even though it can be negative, it's good. But yeah, there definitely needs to be a balance. We can't be here just being too negative the whole time. So yeah, thank you for that suggestion. Thank you to everyone. I'm just going to give some shout outs in the chat to anyone still around. Thank you to Terrain, Razor, Shots, Firewheeling, Zengens, Jeremy, Tsunami, Butterbar Gaming, Awesome 9612, Colonel Dingus, I like your name, Pesky Ion, Unoriginal, and let me go through some more. Feel free to type in the chat if you just want a final shout out here. Once again, this episode is going to go on YouTube. As long as everything worked out sound-wise, I think it did. Allowing Feline, Okie Dokie, Enderain, Zengens, Death,
what day of the week
Reaper.
do you think?
I don't want to say yet for sure, but I think the weekends are a good time for me.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know about you. We'll Jared and I will like discuss that and then come up with like a general time frame of like when we're gonna do this. But yeah, we'll let you guys know either on a video on Titanfall Legends or on social media. Shout out to Jump Core, Joey, Razor. Wow, there's so many comments. Senor, Enderin, Night Eagle, Snowjob, Santizi, Crusher, Hostile, Slurtle, Colonel, Real Fire, Clear Gnome, Joey Carboni, DOX1, the most MLG gamer ever, Terrain X Blocks, Blue Navy, Snowjob. People are saying yo twice to get the second shutout. That's crafty. And everyone else I missed, thank you for watching.
Turret guy, apparently I interrupted right before you read his name or something. Anyways. But.
Okay. Thank you for watching, and I will let Jaredude do the outro.
Oh goodness,
I've really put you on the spot there.
As always, leave a comment in your answer in your head.
Stand by for Titanfall outro.
My name's Jared Jacksondale, and until next time, stand by for Titanfall.